Okay, thank you, Senator. We have a full through here, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to, we're going to hear H.R. 593, compensating Mr. Dennis Arnold Perry for wrongful arrest and convictions, and that is Representative Hogan from the 179th. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee. Today I appear before you for House Resolution 593, seeking compensation for Dennis Arnold Perry. Mr. Perry was wrongfully convicted of the murders of Harold and Thelma Swain and spent more than 20 years wrongfully incarcerated in prison. DA and other evidence has proved his innocence. The DA in Glenn County, the GBI, found him to be innocent. Superior Court found him to be innocent, and the resolution seeks to compensate Mr. Perry for his wrongful imprisonment. And I'd like to turn it over to the attorney that's been working on he'll be short.
Mr. Chairman, gladly. My name is Phil Holliday, and thank you. My name's Phil Holliday, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be brief. As Representative Hogan said, Dennis Perry spent 20 years in prison for crimes. He's always denied he committed crimes that the original investigating officers, Chief Investigator Butch Kennedy and GBI Agent Joe Gregory, always thought he was innocent of and could not have committed because he had an airtight alibi. Crimes that DNA evidence, as Mr. Hogan indicated, has now conclusively proved he did not commit, and in fact has linked another suspect to the murders. And as Mr. Hogan added, after a thorough reinvestigation of the case, the New Brunswick District Attorney Keith Higgins and the GBI don't think he committed these crimes. They all believe he's innocent. So you ask yourself, if all that's true, how did we get here today? We got here today because officials charged by the state of Georgia to uphold and enforce the law, an assistant district attorney and a deputy sheriff, did just the opposite. They violated the law. They ignored court orders, and they withheld, lost, ignored critical evidence that would have proved Dennis Perry's innocence more than 20 years ago. Now, for a lot of people, yes, sir. Anytime, please, anybody.
Thank you, and I don't want to belabor this too long, but has there been an investigation on those officials for their gross misconduct and potential illegal acts?
Senator Albers, I can't tell you that there has been. I know that the assistant district attorney no longer works in the office. When the new district attorney came in, that assistant was not retained, and he's no longer there. And I think that the deputy sheriff responsible for this misconduct, which all took place back in 1998 to early 2000, retired long ago. So I don't know what's been done to them.
I appreciate that. After this is over, I'd like to give him my card because I'd like to further investigate this. It doesn't matter whether they committed the crime 20 some odd years ago or not, or 30 years ago. That gentleman spent 20 years in jail, and they should be held accountable as well.
Thank you, and we totally agree with that.
Thank you.
The result is just what you would expect. A man's life was wrecked. He lost his home. He lost his then marriage. He lost his cars, his tools of his trade, everything. That would have buckled most people, but not Dennis Perry. He's not most people. Strengthened by his faith in God, supported by his now wife, he continued to proclaim his innocence, hired new lawyers, and urged us to do what we could to prove his innocence.
Thank you.
Luckily for us, in May of 2020, we were able to obtain DNA evidence related to another suspect in the case. We sent it to the same testing lab that had tested the original. I should explain. There were a pair of glasses found at this crime scene, which occurred in a rural African-American church. The killer was known to be white. And there were 3 Caucasian hairs trapped in the hinges of the glasses found at the crime scene that everybody agreed was left there by the killer. We were able to get a hair sample from that suspect's mother. We had it tested by the same lab that did the original DNA testing, and it shows that not only does the DNA evidence not match Mr. Perry, it matches this other suspect. Armed with that evidence and the misconduct we had uncovered that occurred by the DEA, Assistant District Attorney and law enforcement, we went back to the court, and Judge Scarlett heard the evidence, overturned the conviction, released Mr. Perry, and a year later, the new DA in Brunswick, the Brunswick Circuit, Keith Higgins, completely exonerated Mr. Perry, asked the judge to dismiss the charges against him, which he did. The GBI also weighed in. They thoroughly reinvestigated the matter, and as Representative Hogan said, they are convinced of Dennis Perry's innocence. Which brings us why we're here today. This system in Georgia right now, this is the only avenue available to an exoneree like Mr. Perry for compensation. And so we are here asking that the legislature do what it can. We understand this process can't fully compensate Mr. Perry for all he's been through. I'm not certain of much in life anymore, but I am certain of this. There's not a person in this room who would take any amount of money to have happen to them what happened to Dennis Perry. And so I'm here to answer any questions you have about Dennis's compensation claim, any questions you have about the case, but we really appreciate your consideration.
And thank you very much for your time.
Make a
So
motion.
is he out of prison?
He's out of prison, and I met him this past Thanksgiving, the first time I had met him. He's
Okay. Any questions before I turn it over to Senator Albers for a motion? Any questions from any of the? I got one. Okay. Senator Harper?
Thanks, Senator Speech. This is a little hot.
Turn these two off.
Yeah, get the volume. Yeah, there we go. Hit the volume button. There you go. So you said there was another suspect. Has that? I know this is absent of what we're doing here. Has that suspect been?
No, we're wondering why he has not been arrested and charged with this murder, because the DNA evidence pointed directly to him.
Okay. So, and we've had this conversation in this subcommittee before about the level of to a degree of I hate to use the word misconduct, but I think there could be that might be an appropriate word. I agree with Senator Albers. I think there's that I understand the purpose of why we're here and what we're doing, but at the same time, I think there's a time and a place for folks that caused us to be in this position and us to be in this room. I think at some point we have to look into that as well, of how did we get to where we are today, and why are we here, and are there things in that particular processes and those processes that we can work on. And we've had that conversation in this subcommittee before. I think those are things that we need to continue to work on going forward, and ensuring that we have a judicial system that we can be proud of and continue to have full confidence in. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And just to prove that truth is always stranger than fiction, the mother who provided us the hair sample that we used for the DNA, the mother of the other suspect, was found dead the weekend after Dennis Perry, the order came out overturning Dennis Perry's conviction, and it's my understanding that investigation is still open.
And it's a good possibility she was strangled.
So, but I would like to address one thing. The compensation as it's currently to be paid out is a lump sum, which we're very appreciative of, and an annuity over 20 years.
So it'd be a
$500.
initial payment.
Yes, sir.
And a 20-year annuity.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Of $1,230,000.
Because Mr. Perry is 60 and his wife is 64, and because he was in prison from 38 to 58, he has no heirs. If there is any way that could be paid out in a shorter period of time, given those peculiar circumstances, it would be a real help to Mr. Perry. But I want you to understand we'll be grateful for whatever can be done.
That's the way the resolution's written by the
House, yes, sir.
Right, it's passed in the House, and it's in the budget appropriations in the House.
That's fine.
Right.
Understand completely, and we certainly want it to happen.
Any other questions, or I'm going to turn it over to Senator Roberts? Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to pass House Resolution 593 LC 345828S.
Got a second from Senator Tate. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye, or raise your hand. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have one more. We've got Representative Holcomb. We've got House Resolution 626 compensating Mr. Kerry Robinson for wrongful arrest and conviction. Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's my pleasure to speak on behalf of Mr. Robinson. I was approached about helping Mr. Robinson last fall, and I think, as some of you are aware, one of my main focuses over the last several years is to address the state's approach to sexual assault, and particularly to work to ensure that DNA is tested in a timely manner and that we use that appropriately. One of the things that I've said in working on legislation is that DNA can be used both to identify those that perpetrate the crimes, and it can also be used to exonerate them. And this is an instance where the DNA has been used to exonerate an individual who did not commit a crime that he was convicted of and that he spent 18 years in prison for. The very quick factual sketch is this was a truly horrendous and heinous crime that took place. It was a sexual assault involving multiple perpetrators. The main perpetrator was identified by the victim, and then he, as an incentivized informant, identified Kerry Robinson. Kerry was 17 years old at the time that the sexual assault took place. Kerry Robinson has always maintained his innocence throughout, and the evidence showed that the main perpetrator picked both Mr. Robinson and another individual to protect his friends who participated in the sexual assault. Mr. Robinson was convicted based on this incentivized testimony, as well as one other key fact, which is relevant to the state's role in compensation. The GBI witness, and I have tremendous respect and admiration for the work that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation does, but in this instance they got it wrong. The GBI expert witness, when he testified, he said, "I cannot do the math, but it is a very, very low probability that the person who committed this offense was anybody other than Mr. Robinson," and he stressed very, very low probability. This corroborating testimony was used to convict Mr. Robinson. When the DNA evidence was actually tested correctly, it was found that Mr. Robinson, who is African American, it would be 1,800 times more probable that a random person on the street committed the offense than Mr. Robinson. It took 18 years to get to that conclusion. 18 years. So he was released. He's doing very well today. He has a job. He's living with his sister and brother-in-law. Similar to what you heard about Mr. Perry, it's been really quite inspiring getting to know him and working for him. He is eminently grateful to have his freedom and liberty now. He does not hold any anger in his heart, but this compensation will make a huge difference in his life because he missed out on the most important years of his career, let alone just being away from those that he loved. And then he wasn't contributing to Social Security, he wasn't saving money for retirement, all of those type of things. And before I close, I'll just share with you one anecdote that his sister shared with me while we were waiting for the Claims Advisory Board across the street. She and her mom, who is also Kerry's mother, they knew the victim. They ran into the victim at a supermarket, and Kerry was with them. She came over, the victim came over and talked to them. They had a conversation. And it was only afterwards that they told Carrie who that was. He didn't know who she was, and the victim didn't know who Carrie was. And the victim never, throughout the entire criminal prosecution, never identified Carrie as being somebody that participated in it. So it's a very unfortunate set of circumstances, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them, and I'd respectfully request your favorable consideration.
Is that Mike too?
That's me.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your information and completing the process to provide freedom to this individual. When you said incentivized testimony, what does that mean?
It means that he was given credit and benefits by the prosecution by helping to identify the other individuals, even though it's clear after the fact that the other individuals that he named were not, in fact, the people who participated.
He was that Carrie?
It
When you
was
say
Carrie
he-
and another individual. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Alpers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Holcomb, thank you again for the work you have continued to do year over year on trying to get all of our DNA and other assault kits caught up to speed. It makes a big difference, and
Thank
it's an
you.
honor to help you. Another heartbreaking situation, to say the least, and my heart goes out to them. Do you believe that anything was done either out of conduct or illegally by any of the officials involved in this case, or was this bad science?
I don't know that it matters in terms of how the ultimate determination in terms of that it has to be intentional with respect to approving a compensation request. My own sense is I think it was more negligence in terms of the analysis of the evidence. I don't think that others may disagree, but I don't think that the GBI person who testified was falsely testifying. I just think he really messed up. And it's troubling to me as a former prosecutor that evidence like that would have gotten in without real specificity as to the math. I mean, the DNA, the reason why it works is because of the math, is because it eliminates people and you have certainty that you have the right person. But there is a fact of note that I think is worth sharing, which is, and this is something that I think the state really needs to take a look at, which is the procedures with respect to post-conviction, making sure that in capital cases like this where there is DNA evidence, that we have a system that provides for clearly who is responsible for preserving it in a certain period of time for that to happen. A year after the Mr. Robinson was convicted, the General Assembly changed the time period for us to preserve this evidence, and it was not preserved. So that was part of the problem. It was only until advances in DNA assessment changed over time that they were able to do another analysis in 2018 with this updated technique, which is also important to know the same that GBI uses to affirmatively identify people. So this didn't happen until 2018, and then when it did, it was shared, and then Mr. Robinson was immediately released and exonerated. But another just small little part, which I find to be very troubling, is throughout the whole period of his incarceration, he challenged his conviction. In approximately 2010, there was a request to have other jurisdictions test the evidence and see if they agreed with the assessment. Of 17 different tests that were done, 12 of them affirmatively said it was not Mr. Robinson. 4 of them said it was inconclusive, and only one of the 17 agreed with the GBI's analysis. Mr. Robinson lost his court appeal because the court said they're not going to get into a battle of the experts, when 1 out of 17 agreed with the way that the evidence was examined.
Senator Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another question. Do you suspect that the jurisdictions in which a lot of these occur, that the training, or we use the GBI, we're thinking that we use the GBI in another location because you don't have a location here, so you have to send the evidence someplace else. And I'm looking at, this one was in Colquitt County, which at one time had a GBI. I don't know if it's still there, but I know that there was a movement afloat to move it to another place or to get rid of it, to close it. So do you think that's a big factor? Because sometimes the smaller municipalities are not equipped to handle evidence the way they should.
I agree with you. And one other thing I think the state needs to do longer term is for the most serious offenses is to have a statewide system of preserving this evidence, either a regional approach of multiple buildings or a single facility. There are some other states that do that, and you're exactly right. If you listen to law enforcement and have conversations with them, they will tell you that they have concerns about the manner in which we are preserving evidence and whether or not it is being stored in a way to make sure, it's a little bit gross, so forgive me for that, it's free from rodents, it's free from insects. Like, this has to be maintained in a way that's really preserved for the long term and to where it is not in any way impacted with others. So this is something that we need to address over time and that the appropriations process will play a role in.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions? All right, Senator Alves, did you have a question? No. Okay. Senator Alves, you have a motion?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I move that we pass House Resolution 626 LC 345829S.
We have a second from Senator Davenport. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Now, hold on. Kathleen, do you want them?
Representative Holcomb, your admin called to see if you needed to be at the 8 o'clock meeting, and Senator Tillery said you and Senator Beach can discuss whether you want Senator Beach to carry this for you, or you need to be there at 8. So that's between you two.
Okay.
Okay, I'll handle it. We'll handle that offline. Okay, thank you for, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll talk to them
Okay.
after.
Well, with that, thank you for y'all coming at this late hour. Thank you all for everything, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good meeting.